Hey everyone, we're grateful for your support and hope our podcast has been helpful in both your personal and professional journey. One way to support our podcast is to sign up for continuing education courses, in which we have two live courses coming up. On Thursday, May 30th, there is a course taught by Dr. Monica Williams on culturally informed clinical research. Then, on Monday, June 10th, we have Dr. Kristen Mullane and myself, in which we will be talking about culturally responsive and trauma-sensitive mindfulness for medical populations. And now, without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. As a food lover, I recognize the importance of food in Asian cultures. It serves as a cornerstone for traditions, fostering connections with family and friends through shared experiences and cherished memories, and expressing a sense of hospitality. But what happens when this deeply woven connection with food takes a turn towards disordered eating? How does the practice, once rooted in cultural adaptation, morph into something unhealthy? And for those navigating this complex terrain, what are some key areas to explore with AAPI clients around food, disordered eating, and cultural identity? Welcome to People, Color, and Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. As part of our AAPI Heritage series today, we are joined by Runjhun Pandit, a licensed professional counselor in private practice, a health consultant, and eating disorder advocate. Runjhun has worked in the digital health tech space and is trained in family-based treatment in CBT for eating disorders, where she combines a systems approach to helping young adults address their eating disorder. As a South Asian therapist, Runjhun will be discussing eating disorders and treatment and exploring how eating disorder might show up in the Asian American community. Runjhun, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jack, for having me here. And it's a pleasure being here to talk more about my journey, talk more about in terms of, the struggles that people of color have in general of reaching to a therapist, reaching out into a mental health field. Yeah, it's a pleasure being here.
Oh, well, it's also a pleasure to have you here because one of the things that we actually haven't really talked about is eating disorders in the AAPI community. So why don't you tell me more about your work and how you have been treating this community?
So it's interesting, Jack, like when I stumbled upon eating disorders as a treatment modality as I started gaining my hours towards licensure, and I started digging a little bit. I was like, okay, you know what? If I look at the diagnosis, I look at like the criteria that we talk about, it's something that I have seen before. It's something that I have actually seen, but it's never named as eating disorder. Like back home in India, like people I would see would come up with like, and they still do come up with ideas of you have to look a certain body, otherwise they body shame you or they say something about you or how you look, or there are comments about what you eat, when you eat, how much you eat. And so like all of this was sitting in, and I just like sat back and realized like, okay, this is something that is, it is an eating disorder. It is something that people are now judging, but we never said it. Nobody still says it actually. And when I started digging more, I saw that there isn't much research as well on how much or what is the percentage of, Asian people struggling with eating disorders, even within the United States, or even sitting down and asking, like, hey, what is exactly going on? Like, if you see research papers, there is majority of the population that identifies with the dominant culture, and there is less focus on, okay, what are the people of color doing with this? And so when I started working, my whole aim was and still is to help, the people of color to not just identify that there is an eating disorder, that it is a mental health concern, and not necessarily that it's always negative. It starts as a positive coping mechanism, right? Like if you're in a high chaotic environment and you don't know what to do, the first thing you're going to do is, okay, you know what, I want to shut my emotions. I don't have any other skill. But once I eat something or I refuse to eat something, my body just kind of goes into a fight or flight. So I'm just going to like shut it out, shut my emotions, numb them. And it works for a while. And then when that becomes a habit, that's how it develops into an eating disorder. And when you see the co occurring disorders that come with it, like whether it is depression, it's anxiety, like, yeah, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling all of these emotions, and then I don't have the skills to talk about it. And then when I started working more and more, I noticed like different pockets of Asian families, kind of parents actually telling me, he or she has to look this way. Even my mom used to tell me I have to look thin. The other day I went to a family gathering and everybody was mocking me for, gaining weight after pregnancy or
Oh
gaining
gosh.
significant weight after delivery. Probably, I think 6 weeks, 7 weeks into it. And
Oh, hold on. So there was criticism after giving birth?
yes, like, oh, you haven't lost weight yet. Or you
Oh
don't,
gosh.
you should be looking more like a mother of one child. Why do you look like a mother of three kids? I don't understand like that
Oh
understanding. Though
wow,
you
that
get,
that is very oh wow.
and it
Mm.
coming from your own parents. And then this whole idea around, I know a lot of people telling me we refuse to eat this, or we have heard, parents, our friends kind of telling us that, oh, you're eating too much. I guess you should lose weight. Like rather than identifying, hey, what is going on for the significant increase or decrease in your appetite. But I will say when there is a decrease, everybody, kind of goes back and says, wow, great. Amazing. I love how you control yourself and your intake, and I love how you're looking. And I remember like family members back home who would also say that to other people, like, oh, you know what? He or she, and typically it was a she, like she, she's stopped eating this and she has cut out carbs and she's on this diet and she looks beautiful because she has lost weight. And then that pattern, that cycle just starts. And because we don't have much idea of what is exactly happening, people don't call it and disorder, people don't call it as a problem, nobody seeks help, so
I
everyone
see.
is like
It's
on
almost
this.
as though the idea of disordered eating isn't discussed because it's not seen as a problem. It's just this is what we do to sort of control people's appearance or attractability. I don't know even what's the purpose. Why would you say this to people? So I'm actually curious about the function of even saying these things, but it's
Because I
not
think
even viewed
it's
as
held
a
like that.
disorder.
But I think it's held like that, right? Like for years to come, if you see history as well, like pe- people push it that if you are thin, if you are at a certain height, weight, and you look like certain people, whether it is your stars or your influencers, you will be great. Like that is how you should be. Or like for example, back home, just like people here talk about like racism, there is a lot of racism in its own way. Back home where we talk about this appearance, like everybody has to look fair. People will apply products to make lighten their skin.
So it's more like colorism.
Yes.
Yes. Hmm.
And then when that kind of comes in, it just like sticks with them that, oh, if I'm not a certain color and then if I'm not of a certain body type, then I'm not good enough. So now then that loops into that, self-esteem concept. And then that kind of puts in everybody into, oh, we have to fix this person. But then nobody calls it as mental health. It goes back and forth into, let's go from keto diet to a low high carb diet to a low xyz diet. Like there's just yo-yo between diets without recognizing, one, its impact on your own physical health, two, the genetics of it. So if your family genetics is in general of a different body shape, you cannot fight that because your bone structure actually is also based on it. But we lack that idea and the thought process that that is how it's supposed to be. And so if we keep on fighting that genetics, we are going to harm ourselves than actually do well about it.
And so I guess for therapists out there who are listening to our show for AAPI series, and we're thinking about working or treating eating disorders in the AAPI community, what are some things that we might want to consider as part of treatment or things to explore?
I think the one important thing that I feel comes out of it is, apart from the history taking and apart from everything that we do for a clinical work, it is so important to ask what the family culture is around eating, in terms of what do you eat, how do you eat, when do you eat, where do you eat, with whom do you eat, what is the environment on the dinner table when you're eating, what are some comments that are made by the immediate family, by extended family. Also, from experience, I know that people have nicknames from their body type. So back in India, if you are of a you if you if you are in a bigger body type, from birth they will give you a nickname which is related to your body. So it can be called like Golu or Motu. And these are basically, they stick with them. And then when they grow up and you start like, hey, how did I get this nickname? You start realizing, oh, when you were a kid, you were so called fat. And so that's why we call you this. And then just that just continues. And I still don't know, to be honest, how much of it affects their own personal narrative of who they are and what they are, because it is so
Mm.
common. Like someone is thin, they would just name this person or nickname is thin. They don't even acknowledge their real name.
Oh gosh, so the name isn't even acknowledged, you're just acknowledged by this nickname. I mean, I can imagine what sort of internalization process happens at such an early age up to adulthood that I would want to explore that with my patients.
Yes, and it is interesting to see that for some people it doesn't even matter, but for most of them who really struggle with body image, especially around puberty, it sticks a lot, because they will come back and tell me like, what, actually people will call me this and they still call me this. And then if you name it out loud, everyone say, oh, this, she was so cute or he was so cute, so you would call him or her that growing up. But it never stood out as how much this would be affecting them. And then again, it goes back to feeling that if you bring this up as, hey, I'm hurt by this, or this isn't okay to call or name someone this way, it can come off as you are too weak. Like, you're too weak, this is just a joke, without
Mm.
realizing that it has such a lasting negative impact on someone. And it isn't a way to label anybody.
And and so when clients are sharing these details, these intimate details of, just conversations at home, just how painful it is to be described by their body type. And I'm thinking about your current work with your clients. Can you share with me how you go about maybe a treatment? Just how might you work with the client, an AAPI client who is struggling with eating disorder? Maybe walk me through some ideas or tips that you've typically incorporated.
Yeah, so I usually go in with first having the family kind of understanding what is going on with them, what are we looking at. And then as we start gathering history, I will first have the parents just in the room and kind of talk to them and get their ideas of the situation. And then I will have more of the kiddo in the room, and we'll be talking, when if I'm working with teens, like I will be talking to them about their perception. And I've often seen there is a discrepancy. There is a discrepancy because there is a lot, even though parents realize that they are making those comments, there is a lot of hiding that happens. Versus like the kid is very honest, the teen is very honest with me into, okay, yeah, this is exactly how I feel, or this is what happens if you see objectively in my house around food or anything in general. And then my aim is to, if this person needs support in terms of medical stabilization and all of it, we first make sure, like, they have a doctor in place, they have a dietitian in place, they have even a psychiatrist if needed in place, all of them who do have an idea about eating disorders. And I'm very firm about it because I have seen more harm done when a primary care physician or a dietitian is not ED aligned, because then they go into again the cycle of, oh, they're fine, they look fine, right, they're fine, like their labs are fine, but that does not mean they're fine. And then this just makes it harder to work with the member or the parent to understand, hey, this is a problem. Then I also do parent coaching in terms of helping the parents understand the cultural underpinnings of it. Okay, what are some things that are coming up? And I will say I get a lot of resistance, a
Now,
lot.
say more about the cultural underpinnings.
So I asked them to kind of think about, like, whether these, their comments or their ideas around food or how much should be eaten or what should be eaten, is it based on their own understanding? Is it based on something that is coming from their culture? Is it something that is based on a culmination of, sometimes lack of resources? Like growing up, if you have lack of resources, yes, I understand that your thought process is going to be just like for money, right? We will be frugal. The same way we will be frugal around, like, how much I eat and what I eat. And so
Well, I
let's
love that you're questioning, hey, where's this cultural assumption or cultural knowledge of food obtained? How was it obtained? I love that you're asking this.
in the Western culture, we are privileged to have a lot of food, a lot of like resources around us. So we don't understand what it means not to have it. But I'm coming from a developing country where, we were always told, for example, like when you exit the room, make sure you turn off the lights. You have to make sure. Or, you know, don't waste food. Everybody doesn't get it. And at that point, as a kid, I was like, ugh, what are they talking about? But when you grow up and you start actually see the real world and you see those things, you realize that i- in a country where you have abundance of resources, it can be very easily overlooked that there could be a history, if not their own, their family's history of coming from, you know lower income population, feeling like, okay, I did not have it, and so I gave it, and on some level I'm still functioning like that even though I have now the resources. And so, like, those questions, when I ask my parents and I tell them, like, okay, let's go from here, let's explore. Again, it is a no blame environment, it is nobody's fault. And we are here. This is the problem. We still have to fix it because we have to support your child, or we have to support you per se, or your loved one. And it takes time for them to see that, because, again, in Asian culture, there is so much blame on parents. Like everything that the kid does, everything anybody does, it just comes back to parents. Like, oh, you were at fault. You could have done better. But there isn't anything that is right or wrong. Everybody has their way. Everybody is parenting from the resources that they have and from the background that they come from.
I love that compassionate approach because I can just also say, from an AAPI community, there's this idea of, think about how there's a lot of onus on the child's behavior is responsibility of the parents.
Within the AAPI community, when you're talking about mental health, right? I still remember we would always say, oh, something's wrong with you, hence you have to see a therapist. But that isn't the case. Like, look at the life around us. There is stress, there is anxiety, we are always, there's uncertainty. And humans in general don't do well with uncertainty. We will feel sense of, like, I just want to talk this out to someone who is more neutral. I just want to, like, I would have people come in even from, like, you know seeking help and tell me, like, I just want a sounding board. I want to talk this out. Oh, aha, great, okay, move on. And the same thing comes down to, parenting. And then when, they are given the diagnosis of, oh, they have an eating disorder, I know the label, we hold those labels so tightly. Oh my god, my kid is anorexic. And I was like, no, your kid is struggling with anorexia. It isn't a part of personality, it's not their identity. Don't make it their identity. And it's always like reframing their ideas, reframing their words. is a lot that I do in within the session as well, is that gives the other person who is in treatment the hope that this isn't part of my personality. I don't have to define myself with this. This is a hurdle, and we are going to overcome this. Just like when we fall sick, we get hurt. We do go to the doctor, right? We don't say, now I have a fractured leg. I'm a fractured person. I'm a broken person. No, we just say, okay, let's get this together, move it. I have a life to live. And that is where I find it interesting when I'm connecting with these parents, that obviously there's one set of parents that be like, yes, I agree with you. We're moving with this. And then there is other set which is really hard to kind of get through and break the glass. So with them, it is more around like videos, connecting them with support groups, connecting them with even other professions where, I'll talk to the dietitian and say, hey, if you can also say the same thing because this is what is going on, that would help for them to understand it. And it's coming from very different levels. And then it kind of comes together. But yes, if the parents are completely not on board with the eating disorder, it does become an additional barrier to kind of overcome. Because first, you have to overcome the barrier of let's accept there is a problem. You have not created it, it's not your fault, but we have to still do something about it.
Yeah, you involve the parents and you're also reframing the language that they're using in a
Hmm.
way that is non-blaming. I also love the medical analogy. If someone breaks their leg, they're not broken. You go fix the broken leg. What a great comparison there. So you're an eating disorder advocate in a community working with both teens and family members. Can you share with me, how did you get into this work?
It's, if I look back, like it's a very interesting journey for me. Is so when I was growing up, and again in India, years ago, there wasn't much focus on mental health. There weren't, even like in schools or outside, there weren't private practices. There weren't people promoting, oh, we are therapists, so we are psychiatrists. Like, all of these people would be, typically psychiatrists doing therapy, and they were in these hospitals. And even I remember my when I would meet talk to a friend or a family member, and we talk about like things they're struggling with, nobody would talk about going to anybody. They'd be like, okay, let's take family support, talk to this aunt and this uncle, and she felt the same thing and he felt it, and this is how they dealt with it. Probably you should do that. And yes, that's community support is important. It definitely gives you hope. And there is something wrong here because then we go in the same loop. And so when I grew up, and there was one day when my parents told me, hey, we are going to see someone. That's all they told me. And I was like, what do you mean? And in my mind I was like, oh god. And I was a teenager, so I was like, oh, I guess I did something wrong. Something's wrong with me. They're like, no, this is, this person, you can talk to her about anything. My mind was in a complete conspiracy theory. I was like, this person will ask me details, and then she'll go and tell my parents, and I'm not going to open up. And I still remember and recall walking into this clinic, and she meeting me, she's sitting me down, and then she walked through confidentiality and all of it. And I just looked at her and was like, I don't believe you, I don't trust you, I'm not saying anything. And she was so patient with me in terms of explaining what is the role that she does. Then she gave me resources to reach. She's like, I understand. And this is, there you go. Like, this is what it is. We are still developing here in India. Learn this. And the more I remember like writing down on a paper, like, there's sports psychology, there is developmental psych. I was like, whoa, like this looks interesting. Like, what is going on? And when I digged in, I realized that I was actually doing a lot of it with my friends. So I would be hours and hours on the phone telling my friends if, they were struggling with their parents as teenagers, or they were trying to create like these boundaries with them, or even to hear them say, oh, I had a breakup, or I was struggling, or my grades are low. And I would spend and I would feel happy about it, happy in the way that I was able to help someone at the end of the day. I was able to be there for someone and hear them, probably give them some feedback, or just be a sounding board. And so when she opened this to me, And I really thank my parents because up till then I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Like I was like, what do I do? Like everybody in India would either be an engineer or a doctor. I was like, I don't like either of them. When I started talking to her and I dig deep, I started realizing even more that, oh, this is something that we have. We have it in India. People don't say it. I remember visiting one when I was a kid in my school, and it was rare. Like now, when I go back, I see almost every school is mandated to have a counseling center. Versus when I grew up, it was like those privately paid schools where you would have these therapists come in or counselors sit there, but there wasn't much around, like, oh, again, like if you go to that counselor's room, you have a problem, rather than saying like, okay, we sometimes do need help from an outside source, a different perspective, so to speak. And so this entire thing of, walking into those doors, meeting her, connecting with her, understanding a new field, I went on to the journey of like having my bachelor's and my master's. It was actually in my master's program. And it's funny, right? Like you would think that there would be books for the Asian population, but all my textbooks were based on American culture.
Oh, wow.
Like I
So
said,
you were doing this study in India, and all the textbooks were
yeah, they
European.
still
Oh,
are.
wow.
They still
Wow.
are. The one thing that struck me was I want something that is more real. I want something where I want to help people on a global level to understand mental health. But if I myself don't understand this, and then I came here and I started noticing, you go from like a majority culture to direct a minority culture. And it felt so weird. I was like, oh, now I'm seeing it from the other side. You are a minority in this country. It's a very different feeling, navigating the system, navigating different areas. Now nobody is looking at you as, oh, you are someone who knows things. You have to come to a point of, you have to, one, prove yourself, and secondly, you have to have a robust understanding of what you're doing. And so this just entire journey was so informative for me to realize that now in the last 10 years, mental health has grown significantly. Like I think it took an entire generation to not accept it, to a generation where they are accepting it, taking it forward, they are voicing it, and people are willing to go to a therapist, talk to a therapist. And it just sits with me that I'm noticing that change happen in all the cases. Like I see, this generation here, and they are more open, they're willing, they're talking, they're sharing, whether it's on social media, whether it is through school work. And the difference in the way people talk these days. And now I see a very different country, a very different language system where everybody's trying their best to be inclusive, where they are trying to have that, they're definitely increasing their knowledge of how to respect other human, period.
Yeah, there's
Remove
definitely
caste.
a greater awareness, just a lot of body appreciation. And now I want us to shift gears a little bit, and that is, as a person of color, what were some challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
I think the first and the major one was being in a very white dominant population. So when I got here and I went to school, I realized I was the only Indian there. I feel so out of place. And that is when I've slowly started realizing that people don't come here for psychology. One of it is because of the entire visa concerns. Overcoming that, then realizing that we come with loans to be paid off. And so at home, like that wasn't a problem because you were earning in the same and you were spending in the same. And then you come here and you start realizing that there is discrimination. There is some form of discrimination, whether it is based on your language, the way you talk. I remember this very significant incident where I was covering for another clinician, and one of their clients' parents put put their kid outside and told me, okay, so are you a Mexican? And I was like,
Oh my gosh.
and I was an associate at that point. So it wasn't like I was like, you, I don't know. I don't know how, like, I'm sitting with that anger, I'm sitting with frustration, because how is that affecting what I'm doing here? Would you have asked any other clinician about this? And you know, when you have to regulate yourself and you have to be courteous and, you know, make sure that they understand where you're coming from, I think this was one of those most challenging parts. And I still see people who would question you because you probably don't have that extensive vocabulary, without realizing that it's not our dominant language. It's almost like our brain is translating from a our dominant language to English, and then we are speaking. And so a lot of times, like, when they don't know your dialect, they don't understand what you're speaking, it almost feels like you're reminding me that I'm not in my country. So as a person of color, for me the journey is, can I make it to a point where I am able to be a face for other people of color, to know that there is some representative there, because I don't see that either. I see very few therapists who identify with the Indian culture, who are willing to work, or who identify with the Asian culture and are focusing on taking care of them. Because when we go into situations, we are catering to the dominant culture, whether it is, and again, like, there are other barriers to mental health that are also causing this, like, insurance. If you go to private pay, like, hey, that is going to cost. It might not be something that they want help, but now going through the hoops of all of it, am I willing to pay all that? And so, like, I realize, like, coming through as a person of color, that there's a lot of areas where we still find it hard to speak up, with the fear of that internal judgment of, what would people say? Am I supposed to be at par with the dominant culture? And that, I know when we are talking sometimes about, like, this imposter syndrome and all of it, it is because we are told that the dominant culture is superior than you. Like, not told, but like implicitly, we kind of feel that. And it's like, I want to break that barrier. I'm still figuring out how, but I want to break that barrier where nobody is superior. Like, it's all
I
created.
love that statement. And, you're right. No one is superior. If we believe that one group is more superior than another, that is the fuel for racism. And
Yeah.
and so, as many folks have talked about, where they're faced with these challenges, it's an ongoing process. What does it mean to be a South Asian therapist for you?
It's a very interesting question. I think it is first me understanding my identity. It's me understanding that, okay, I'm a South Asian therapist. What does that mean? Because South Asia in general is so huge. You cannot represent that alone. There are different languages, there are different cultures within a same region. I have seen people come up with, like, different ways of their interpreting things, different ways of living, different ways of, food habits, how they, like, within a state there will be a booming metropolitan city, and there you will have, like, different ideas, thought processes, and then you, as move away from the city, you will have, like, very different kind of people. And so being a South Asian is sitting with the idea that you will never know everything, and You're still here to learn and understand so that you can help people who are coming from that land to see someone who identifies with them, identifies with the fact that she's willing to stand for mental health. She's willing to advocate for or talk on your behalf sometimes to others, to family members, to the people of your community. There is someone there. Because I myself find it hard when I'm searching for a therapist. If I want someone who's going to understand where I'm coming from, not just someone who would just put labels on me and, this is how they do it and move on. And when I did not find that how it sits with me is I want someone like that. I want someone who will know what it means to be a person of color, to be a minority, and the struggles, the silent struggles on a day to day basis that we have.
Wow, Runjhun, well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Do you have any other final thoughts?
Oh, I think be kind towards everybody. My whole game is I want to spread this idea that let's treat each other as humans and let's be kind to each other because we don't know what battles everybody's fighting on a day-to-day basis. And I think when we go from that, it becomes a lot easier to see someone else's perspective rather than looking down at them or pointing fingers at them. Just kind of take a step back and ask, like, probably they are struggling today.
So, Runjhun, I know you're doing private practice, and so you also recently launched your website, wellbeingden.com. We'll
Mhm.
include that in the show notes. Are there any other ways in which our listeners can support you?
Reach out to, me or just, visit my website to kind of see if there are any things in a way that I can support. We need help, we need support, and we need to talk to people of color more often.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and really speaking about eating disorder in the AAPI community because that, just isn't really talked about. So again, Runjhun, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Jack. It was a pleasure being here and speaking about eating disorders in the Asian community.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.